Okay, so before we start this off, I want to say that I want to start a new series called Storytime, where I basically tell you the tales of things that have happened to me or to someone else that I witnessed, but I'm able to tell a story in a funny way. So if you guys think this is a good idea, then just let me know. Okay, here we go. First off, I'd like to say that this story actually wasn't funny in any way, but I'm just able to tell it in a way that seems funny. I don't know if you remember, but back in September, I had a cold. It wasn't really anything major to me for a while, but while I was still trying to get over it, my family decided to go on to a camping trip, during which I was miserable the whole time because I started to get a fever and had a headache, and I got congested and I was cold. Basically a bunch of symptoms, plus having some of having a cold. Well, it's not that bad. The day before we came back, I blew my nose too hard. For those of you who have never heard me blow my nose, which I don't think any of you have, I used to blow my nose really loudly. People kept telling me that it sounded like a foghorn, and I'd agree. But my dad would always tell me that if I continued that, then it would be bad for my ears, that it would blow my eardrums out or something. I always thought that it would never happen to me. Well, this time that stuff that was in my nose traveled to my ear, but I didn't know it at the time. I couldn't hear very well out of my right ear, but that happened quite often when I blew my nose. I tried yawning to clear it out, but it didn't work, so I thought it would just go away after a while, but it didn't after, 3 weeks. But there was more to that. The day passed, and I woke up the next morning, and I still couldn't hear very well out of my right ear. We were going to drive home that day, but my parents thought that when we got back home, we would be at a lower elevation, so maybe it would clear up then. But it actually just made it worse, and my ear actually started to hurt. My mom had me lay on the couch and put a hot water bottle to my ear, which you should not do. It didn't relieve me of the pain. In fact, we learned later that it might have made it worse because of the pressure to my ear. You're actually supposed to use an ice pack instead. That same night, I had a play rehearsal I had to go to. Just minutes before we left to go there, I had been laying on my bed softly crying because the pain was so bad. But me being me, I didn't tell anyone and decided to go to the play rehearsal anyway. I made it through the entire thing too, and I was perfectly fine, but throughout the rest of the day, the pain in my ear just didn't help me at all. Then the morning came, and I woke up around 6:30. This was a Tuesday, with a throbbing pain in that right ear. I didn't do anything about it for a while, but it was hurting like never before. I tried browsing through YouTube or reading to take my mind off of the pain, but it just got worse and worse. Around 7:15, I still wasn't out of bed, but I was hearing something out of that right ear. You know that sound you hear when water gets into your ears from swimming and then you lean your head to one side for a while and the water comes out? That's what I was hearing, but I didn't know what it was, and it wasn't helping me with what I was feeling at all. I started calling for my mom. Well, actually, I started screaming for my mom to help me. Continuing this process for about 15 minutes, she came up to my room and I told her that my ear hurt, and she ran off to get me some medicine to help with the pain. She told me to get up and dress, have something to eat, and text my teacher that I wouldn't be showing up for class that day. My mom made a phone call to get me to the doctor, who wasn't even my doctor since mine had a faux schedule that day, to check out what was going on. She went out and I got up and dressed, and I sat on my bed for a moment to comprehend what had just happened. I gazed down at my pillow and I noticed there were small blood stains on the pillow. My ear had seriously been bleeding that morning. Anyway, fast forward to the doctor. We got there around 9:15, and we didn't get around to actually seeing the doctor until 10:30. Of course, we did everything with the nurse. She asked me how much pain I was in on a scale of 1 to 10, and I remember saying 7. She left my mom and I in the examination room, and from the time she left to the time the doctor came in, half an hour later, it the pain in my ear, I would say, shot up to 9. Just so you can get an understanding of why I was answering with so high of numbers, I had never been in that much pain before. I've never had any major injuries, like no broken bones, no stitches, nothing. I really didn't have much to compare this to. We don't need to get into details with the doctor. To sum it up, though, he said that it sounded like I was just congested. He ordered me a prescription for us to pick up in about 2 hours and said to come back around 3 or 4 weeks to see if the ruptured eardrum had healed up. So my eardrum had actually ruptured, and if we didn't do much, then the other one might have too. My mom and I left the room to talk to the secretary about scheduling another appointment. As they were talking, I stood by my mom's side, and then all of a sudden, everything slowly started to go black, and I was trying to balance myself by leaning against the secretary's desk. The back of my neck started to hurt, and I started to get a headache. I could hardly stand, and I felt like I was about to throw up. My mom looked at me and asked me if I was alright, and all I said was that my spine hurt. The secretary pulled out a chair, and they both helped me sit down. I couldn't say anything for fear that I might hurl. I was just trying to stay contained. I'm a pretty tall girl, coming up at 5 feet and 8 inches. In fact, I was surprised that the nurses weren't freaked out when they had to help this 5'8", 15-year-old girl into a wheelchair when they themselves are probably coming around at 5 feet. Well, maybe they were kind of scared, but they were focusing on getting me somewhere where I could lay down. They brought me into this room and laid me on one of those typical beds you would see in a room like that. The bed was completely flat and I was laying down, but the laying down had put more pressure on my ear, which made the pain even worse, but they were working on finding a way to raise the bed in a way that my head and back would be up. Now at this point, my neck didn't hurt anymore, but everything else like the headache and throwing up feeling were still there. I could move around a little more, but that was about it. I was still very weak though. And remember that I said that this room was hardly ever used? What they did with the bed was that they actually raised my feet up, causing my head to slowly go down, which put more pressure on my ear, as I constantly heard a thump, 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 thump. It turned out that the bed wasn't positioned correctly, so they told me to get up and switch around so that my feet were closer to the wall. Within a few minutes, my mom was leaning an ice pack against my ear. The blinds of the window were closed, hoping that my headache would go away. Something was on my finger to measure my pulse. I don't know what it was. If you guys know what it was, let me know in the comments. And one of the nurses had given me a small can of juice to drink. Another nurse left to get the doctor I had seen minutes before, and he said that the most probable reason for why all of this had happened was because I was so overwhelmed with the pain in my ear, and I wasn't used to it. I heard the sound of the fluid coming out of my ear, and this time it wasn't blood, thankfully. I still can't describe what it was, but it was like this dark yellow stuff. And I can't describe the feeling of it running down my cheek and neck, knowing that whatever it was also got in my hair. You could probably get a feeling from that then. I just sat there for I don't know how long, as my mom held the ice pack against my ear and the nurses were making sure I wasn't dehydrated. I wanted to fall asleep, but too many things prevented me from doing that, such as the freezing ice pack against my ear and cheek, the pain in my ear that got worse every time fluid came out of it, my mom asking me questions about how I was feeling and if we could leave yet, and the nurses asking me if I was cold or needed something to drink. Just to name a few. Eventually I felt better, other than the constant pain in my ear. I was no longer weak, but at the same time I didn't feel like doing or saying anything. One of the nurses rolled me out of the treatment room in a wheelchair and gave me a pink bucket. His name is Mr. Pinky Regurgitate Bucket. And another can of juice, both of which were in my lap. My mom pulled the car up to the front of the building. The nurse took me out there and I was helped into the passenger seat of the car, even though I felt like I didn't need help. My mom and I drove to the pharmacy to pick up the prescription that the doctor had ordered before. The entire time I was leaning my head against the window as I held yet another ice pack against my ear and Mr. Bucket was sitting in my lap. We got home and my mom helped me onto the couch, and I still feel like I didn't need help. I sat on the couch and put on a movie, and my mom made me chicken noodle soup for lunch. I just sat there the entire time watching The Princess Bride and a goofy movie. For the next few nights, I would sleep in a bed with a stack of 2 pillows, one of which had a towel on it to absorb further drainage of my ear. I also showered with a silicone earplug in my ear so that the water wouldn't get into my ear. I'm also a perfect pitch musician, and everything sounded at a slightly lower frequency than usual, so everything sounded off pitch, which drove me insane. Then, before everything returned to its normal frequency after 2 weeks passed, everything sounded at a slightly higher frequency than usual. I also had a hard time hearing normal things. So if a person were to talk to me like the receptionist at the doctor's building, I wouldn't be able to hear him or her very well. You might have already assumed that I couldn't hear very well anyway. So that was the story of how my hearing was affected for 3 or 4 weeks. It's back to normal now concerning frequencies and everything. I actually took one of those online hearing tests while I had the ear infection, and I actually had the hearing of the average person around 45 or 50 years old at the time. Now it's alright though. I believe that I might have permanently lost some of my hearing because I can't hear some quiet things anymore, but some hearing tests say otherwise. I still have the hearing ability of a person less than 18, so that's good. So that wraps this up. If you have any stories about hearing or anything similar to this, just let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to read them. So, signing off for now. Bye.